Meet Li Han, a gifted underdog stuck right in the middle of an apocalyptic chaos where monsters and ancient forces clash. Gifted children have been hunted and gathered since birth, forcing our protagonist into an endless nightmare of survival. Giant beasts and glowing magic users tear up the battlefield, while armored fighters like John desperately try to hold the line against the horde. Talk about a warm welcome to the world, as even Del Simon finds himself staring down the absolute horror of total destruction. Armed with nothing but pure grit and a hoodie, Li Han has to navigate a world full of deadly anomalies and overpowered threats. With monstrous dragons descending from the sky and fire consuming everything in sight, every single second is a desperate fight for survival. But as the cosmic wheels turn and ancient prophecies awaken, our hero prepares to rewrite the rules of this brutal reality. John unleashes a heavy barrage of gunfire against incoming monster hordes, but a massive dragon descends and completely overwhelms him in a blinding flash of energy. Exhausted and battered, he drops his weapon and wakes up in a cold sweat inside a dim room, realizing it was all just a terrifying nightmare. He clutches his head in sheer panic as he tries to process what day it is and whether the disaster is still coming. Meanwhile, a helicopter soars over a sprawling futuristic city while transporting passengers inside its cabin. Li Han sits quietly strapped into his seat with a stoic and watchful expression, staring straight ahead as the transport flight continues its journey. Li Han sits down at an interrogation table across from a senior military officer who reviews his profile document stamped with a D rank. The officer tells him that he will be enlisted as a psyker to save humanity and provided with food and shelter, but Li Han immediately glares back with glowing eyes and demands that his younger siblings also be taken care of if he is forced into the Ark. The officer looks visibly startled by the sudden pressure and agrees to take responsibility for his loved ones, though he adds a sharp warning that such privileges only apply while Li Han serves as a psyker. Stepping out of the transport helicopter, Li Han adjusts his bag and walks firmly across the tarmac toward the towering Ark facility to begin his mandatory service. Li Han stands outside the facility holding a small stone as Del Simon watches him with wide, fearful eyes and weeps on the ground. Del Simon yells out in panic, telling him to go back where he came from and mocking him for crying like a baby. Other onlookers join in the taunts, asking how he is any better than anyone else here. Suddenly, Del Simon's eyes glow bright blue as glowing blue flames erupt around him, and he telekinetically lifts a large heavy stone into the air. With an arrogant grin, Del Simon mocks the cowering kid, wondering if he'll be sent home crying and claiming that weaklings won't survive here. Li Han watches this display with a deadpan expression before casually stepping forward and punching the floating rock right out of the air. He remarks that telekinesis seems way too slow and asks if throwing it by hand wouldn't be more efficient, prompting a furious Del Simon to vow to teach him some manners. Del Simon loudly calls out to Li Han as the intimidating instructor approaches the crowd. John glares down at the students with glowing blue eyes, demanding if Del Simon has already manifested a unique trait. Before anyone can answer, John suddenly slams a brutal punch straight into Del Simon, sending the student crashing hard onto the ground. Standing over the beaten student, John dismissively calls them trash for relying on weak skills. He introduces himself as their instructor who will shape them into warriors for an upcoming battle with a dragon, before ordering everyone to start running laps immediately. Li Han sprints hard around the track while muttering to himself that he is used to this kind of harsh treatment. All around him, exhausted students collapse onto the ground and gasp for air while clutching their stomachs in agony. John glares at the panting teenagers and loudly yells that they are useless weaklings who need to stop getting in the way and go back where they came from. Pacing along the track, Li Han reflects on his own stamina and wonders if he can utilize his ability just like someone else did. He looks over his shoulder at Del Simon, who is gritting their teeth and running right behind him with a fierce expression. Li Han pumps his fist and digs deep to keep going as his shoes tear up against the ground. Meanwhile, another student drops to their knees in tears and mucus, completely overwhelmed by the brutal physical toll. Joan towers over the weeping student, coldly telling them to continue as wide-eyed fear grips the kid's face. Staring ahead with an intense gaze, Joan watches as Li Han runs past while supporting a crying peer over his shoulder. The exhausted student stammers out a weak agreement, and John blows his whistle to keep the agonizing drill going. Li Han collapses face first onto the ground after finishing the brutal morning run alongside other exhausted students. John stands before the class and announces that they will run this exact same distance every single morning during the preparation period, leaving everyone in absolute shock. Later during a lecture, Joan Red explains how psychoenergy is formed within the body and tells the students to imagine its location in their head, heart, or lower abdomen. Li Han touches his chest and silently decides to choose his heart while visualizing his inner power. Moving on to lunchtime, Li Han sits down next to a nervous student and cheerfully invites him to eat together, making the kid blush and think he has just found his first real friend. Just then, Del Simon walks past their table carrying a food tray, and Li Han greets him with a friendly tone while watching him closely. Del Simon glares back with wide, fearful green eyes and an intense expression before walking away. Observing this reaction, Li Han narrows his eyes with a knowing look and thinks to himself that the arrogant student already possesses powers. Li Han chats with the student sitting next to him and wonders if they can actually master psychokinesis within 3 weeks, while the boy blushes nervously and stammers that he can already use it a little bit. Shocked by this casual reveal, Li Han stares wide-eyed at his new acquaintance and realizes the kid is full of surprises. Night falls over the ARC facility as the students settle into their bunk beds, prompting Li Han to lie awake under his covers while wrestling with homesickness and anxiety. He wakes up the next morning and notices other students successfully levitating pencils with glowing blue psycho-energy, which leaves him feeling tense and frustrated as his own desk remains completely still. Later outside, Li Han runs into Del Simon sitting on a bench with another student, and the arrogant blonde flashes a smug grin while asking if he wants to know the secret to using powers. Del Simon's glowing teal-green eyes narrow as he mocks Li Han for forgetting his manners, causing the flustered protagonist to stand his ground and confront the bully. Li Han suddenly gets grabbed and pulled into a headlock by Del Simon, who immediately demands that he stand up and get ready for a lesson. Frustrated by the arrogant demand, Li Han furiously throws a punch right at Del Simon, but ends up stumbling back with wide, terrified eyes when his attack fails to connect properly. Meanwhile, a helicopter flies overhead while Joan Red sits smoking a cigar by an open window, looking completely unimpressed with his surroundings. A bald, chubby scientist wearing glasses suddenly bursts through the door and cheerfully greets Joan Red, asking what he is doing there and complaining about the smoke. Joan Red glares at the newcomer and dismisses the new recruits as total idiots, though he admits that at least 2 of them might actually turn out useful. He points out that Del Simon is already stronger than anyone who finished the first prep level, prompting the chubby scientist to chuckle and joke about finding the next British genius. Joan Reed stands before the gathered recruits and explains that psychoenergy requires eye activation, telling everyone to focus on this basic skill instead of psychokinesis. He orders those who have mastered this external manifestation to step forward and line up in front of a specialist, while the rest are forced to keep running laps under his harsh supervision. Exhausted students struggle to keep pace as they drag themselves around the track, prompting Joan Red to bark at them to move faster. Meanwhile, Li Han clenches his fists in frustration and grabs his chest, staring intently as he desperately tries to awaken his own dormant psychoenergy. A nearby student watches him anxiously, thinking his name, just as Li Han grips his chest with a strained expression. Li Han suddenly takes a blow to the chest and stumbles back in shock, asking if Del Simon is trying to kill him. Del Simon casually dismisses the worry, claiming that a shallow wound will help him concentrate better through the pain. With his eyes wide in sudden realization, Li Han recalls that his true energy center is in his heart, feeling a surge of long-lost power. He grits his teeth and desperately tries to awaken his psychoenergy, muttering to himself that he cannot turn back now. Meanwhile, Joan Red notices that Li Han is the last one remaining and stalks over to him with an intimidating glare. Standing right before the struggling student, the instructor barks that a soldier must always obey orders without exception. Li Han grits his teeth and tells himself that he will force his energy center open as wide as possible. Snapping under the pressure, Joan Red grabs the boy by the collar and furiously demands if he has lost his mind or wants to die. Li Han ignores the grip and suddenly strikes himself right in the chest with a pen, plunging it into his own flesh. A drop of blood hits the ground, and both Del Simon and another student watch in absolute horror with wide, tear-filled eyes. Joan Red stares back in stunned disbelief as glowing blue psychoenergy violently erupts from the boy. With a cold, dismissive huff, the instructor drops him to the ground, muttering that he has never met anyone so utterly hopeless in his entire life. Li Han catches his breath with a bloody chest while another student runs up to check on him, asking if he is okay. Opta steps in with an excited grin to hand over a special bracelet device as a reward for his success, confirming his identity as Private Li Han. Joan Reed announces to the gathered recruits that the class assignment process is nearly complete and tells them to group up. The recruits panic as Joan Reed glares at them with glowing red eyes and remarks that they probably thought he was just a son of a bitch. Octa chuckles and notes that the instructor is clearly taking things personally, while Del Simon stands nearby with a calm, unimpressed look, unimpressed look. Joan Red assigns 4 students to B class, while Li Han proudly thinks about landing in D class and climbing the ranks soon. Finally, Joan Red hands over the remaining recruits to the hulking new instructor Voi Chen, who stares down the terrified students with glowing yellow eyes. The terrified new recruits stare wide-eyed as towering instructor Voi Chen steps forward, whispering among themselves that he looks even more intimidating than Sergeant Joan Red. Voi Chen flashes a friendly grin and tells the nervous students that they are heading to the training hall right away. Inside the spacious facility, the muscular instructor spins a long staff with heavy wrapping at the end, creating massive blue energy rings that slice through the air with deafening speed. Li Han and the other students watch with tense expressions as Voi Chen halts his lethal demonstration right in front of the bleeding boy. The instructor pauses before the class to explain how dragon skin and bones hold and transmit psycho-energy, setting the stage for a lesson on specialized weaponry. Wei Chen explains to the recruits that weapons created from dragon materials are essential for channeling psycho-energy effectively in combat. Li Han asks how dragons were defeated before such advanced swords and spears existed, staring up at the instructor with a bloody chest. Wei Chen notes that this kid has already fought for what he holds dear, grinning warmly as Li Han accepts a wooden staff with a wrapped end. Grasping the weapon tightly, Li Han spins it around with surprising agility while sparring against another student in the training hall. Li Han and Jiazi exchange confident banter while aggressively trading blows with their wooden staffs across the training hall. After a fierce exchange of strikes, Li Han manages to pin Jiazi and claims victory with a grin. Shaking hands afterward, Jiazi admits defeat and mentions he is getting transferred to C class next week, while encouraging Li Han to keep pushing forward. Pointing out his supportive classmates standing nearby, Jiazi notes that everyone agrees Li Han has serious potential. Li Han touches the back of his head and thanks his peers with an appreciative smile before night falls over the facility. Meanwhile, a tense atmosphere settles in as instructors discuss the rigorous training standards while reviewing student progress. Li Han notices Joan Red standing nearby, and glowing blue fire ignites on the instructor's hand as he lights a cigar. Watching from an upstairs window, several recruits cheer and shout encouragement down at Li Han, while Joan Red dismisses them as a bunch of snotty pups. Stepping forward with a wooden staff, Li Han confronts Joan Red and asks if they are fighting barehanded, only for the instructor to drop his cigar and bluntly state that weapons are unnecessary against a kid. Refusing to accept such a dismissive, defeatist attitude, Li Han flashes a confident grin and starts spinning his wooden staff at incredible speeds. Meanwhile, watching recruits cheer on their classmate from the window, betting on whether Li Han can actually land a hit on the formidable instructor. Li Han launches a fierce aerial strike with his wooden staff, but Joan Red easily dodges the blow with a cold glare. Spotting an opening, Joan Red grabs the young fighter by the collar and slams him violently into the ground, kicking him away with brutal force. Sprawled out on the dirt and panting heavily, Li Han stares up in sheer panic as he realizes just how easily the instructor could have killed him. Looking down with a grim expression, Joan Red warns that dragons and their minions won't hesitate to slaughter him, brutally reminding the rookie that everyone simply expects him to die. Shaking off the heavy blow, Li Han grips his staff once more and stammers out Sergeant Red while bracing himself to continue the brutal sparring match. Li Han charges forward and swings his staff, but Joan Red easily sidesteps the attack and lets out a confident grin. Refusing to hold back, Li Han leaps into the air and flips over the instructor to land a surprise hit. The wooden staff shatters against the instructor's shoulder, drawing blood and shocking Joan Red with how fast the rookie managed to move. Recovering instantly from the surprise attack, Joan Red eyes the bleeding cut with glowing blue eyes and decides to stop dodging altogether. Other recruits cheer wildly from the sidelines as Li Han leaps back into action with relentless determination. Dodging another furious swing, Joan Red lunges forward with terrifying speed and catches the young fighter by the throat. Joan Red hoists Li Han into the air by his throat, demanding that the rookie surrender as glowing psycho-energy chokes the boy. Refusing to back down even with tears in his eyes, Li Han desperately struggles against the crushing grip while the surrounding students watch in absolute terror. Wei Chen sprints forward and yells at Joan Red to stop before he actually kills the kid. Joan Red drops an unconscious Li Han to the ground and angrily snaps at everyone to shut up. Wei Chen catches the fallen rookie in his arms and complains that ARC methods are getting out of hand. Leaving the D-class students shaken, Joan Red walks off and tells Wei Chen to transfer Li Han to B-class once the boy gets back on his feet. Del Simon walks down the hallway and bumps into Joan Red, asking if he is putting a student on the list and wondering how B-class students will react to the sudden level jump. Joan Red scoffs at the idea and argues that in battle against dragons, raw psycho-energy isn't everything, and talented candidates shouldn't be written off just for developing slowly. Del Simon is surprised to hear him speak so admiringly of someone, pointing out that Sergeant Red usually acts like a sadist. Meanwhile, Wei Chen shows up holding a basket filled with fruit and a milk carton as a gift for the rookie. He hesitates outside the door before peeking in to find Li Han sitting intently at a table staring at a small glowing blue sphere. Li Han successfully manifests a glowing blue sphere of psychoenergy while Wei Cheng and another staff member cheer him on outside the room. Wei Chen clears his throat and tells the boy to hurry up as they chat about how well he is doing. Li Han sits at the table eating apple slices with a toothpick and casually remarks that his psychic level is still below average. Meanwhile, Wei Chen sits nearby peeling an apple with a small knife while explaining combat mechanics. He points out that while some recruits can summon fire or teleport, fighters need to know how to retrieve dropped weapons during battle. Wei Chen then stops outside the building at night and tells Li Han that his chances of fully awakening his psycho ability are extremely low given his slow development. He warns the young recruit to forget about matching elemental users and asks how someone like him is supposed to fight. Li Han stands tense as Wei Chen lectures the recruits about psychoenergy, explaining that psychokinesis will become their defining trait and comparing psychic abilities to muscles that grow stronger with use. Wei Chen notes that initial skill levels are just an illusion and praises the new generation's massive potential. Li Han salutes with a confident grin and heads straight for the B-class entrance doors. Frankly, he takes a deep breath and steps inside, accidentally bumping right into a bald, blue-eyed recruit with a facial scar. The surprised student glares in shock and rubs his nose before asking if Li Han knows who he is. When the recruit jokingly introduces himself and asks if there is a shorter version of his name, they shake hands and walk together toward the combat training area. Li Han looks around the noisy gym with wide eyes, grabs a wooden training staff, and prepares himself for his first sparring session in B-class. Li Han grips his wooden staff tightly and charges headfirst into a chaotic sparring melee against multiple B-class recruits. He spins and strikes with absolute precision, knocking down his opponents one by one with brutal efficiency until all of them are left groaning and huddled on the gym floor. Standing triumphantly over the defeated crowd, Li Han asks if they had fun and points out that psycho abilities are off-limits here, meaning they would stand no chance if powers were allowed. The friendly scar-faced recruit watches in absolute shock as his jaw drops at the sheer display of martial dominance. Smiling widely, the scar-faced recruit flexes his glowing blue psycho energy and steps forward to challenge Li Han himself. Li Han faces off against the friendly scar-faced recruit, clutching his wooden staff tightly as he questions how training matches work in this class. The scar-faced recruit scoffs at the idea of 3 people ganging up on one underdog, dismissing it as stupid before deciding to show him what a real duel looks like. He ignites his glowing blue psycho energy and steps forward to challenge Li Han directly. Sparks fly as the two clash fiercely, exchanging rapid blows with their wooden weapons in the middle of the gym. Li Han expertly parries a heavy overhead strike, warning his opponent that another block will shatter the staff. He immediately follows up with a swift counterattack, slamming his weapon down hard and catching the scar-faced recruit off guard. Li Han maintains his fierce assault, swinging his wooden staff down with brutal force while his opponent desperately dodges the heavy strike. The scar-faced recruit stumbles backward under the immense pressure, laughing off the close call and boasting that he has practiced combat sports since he learned how to walk. He tries to intimidate Li Han by threatening to choke him out if things get too heated, while the surrounding B-class recruits loudly cheer and mock from the sidelines. Li Han glares at the noisy onlookers, gripping his weapon tighter as he regains his composure and prepares for the next exchange. He suddenly sweeps low with his staff, catching his opponent off guard and shattering the weapon in a flurry of flying splinters. The scar-faced recruit crashes hard onto the wooden gym floor, gripping his head in frustration while Li Han stands over him with a steady, resolute gaze. Li Han quickly shifts his momentum and dives low to evade a sweeping strike from his opponent. He spins midair and tries to close the distance, but the scar-faced recruit reacts instantly and counters with a swift takedown. Li Han gets slammed hard onto the wooden floor as his rival locks him into a tight submission hold. The surrounding B-class recruits throw their hands up in pure shock while watching the intense grapple unfold. Li Han gasps for air and groans in pain under the heavy pressure while his opponent struggles to catch his breath. The scar-faced recruit looks down in disbelief and lets out an exhausted sigh after narrowly surviving the brutal exchange. Li Han stands victorious with his broken wooden staff while the scar-faced B-class recruit collapses onto the floor in defeat. The defeated opponent groans in agony while clutching his head and accusing Li Han of striking from behind like a coward. Li Han brushes off the complaint, pointing out that his rival shouldn't have turned his back during a fight. Later in the recovery room, The scar-faced recruit angrily confronts Li Han and pokes him in the chest while blaming him for his injuries. Li Han suddenly checks his arc bracelet device when a holographic screen activates with an incoming video message. A smiling older military officer appears on the screen, showing a heartwarming photo of himself with 3 young children standing outside a school. Li Han smiles warmly while looking at the projection, and his rival glares with pure annoyance at the wholesome family interaction. Li Han sits up in his hospital bed and looks around with a puzzled expression while his bald, blue-eyed B-class roommate groans in annoyance. The digital clock ticks by as both recruits quickly change out of their hospital gowns and rush out into the corridor in their slippers. They dash through the facility until they stop dead in their tracks near the emergency medical ward, staring in shock as a severely injured person is wheeled past on a stretcher. Li Han points excitedly at the medical team and questions his companion about whether they are supposed to be the same age. Noting that the casualty looked remarkably like an instructor, his bald roommate simply rubs the back of his neck in silence while pondering the chaos around them, because apparently casual near-death experiences are just another Tuesday in this facility. Li Han flashes back to a brutal memory from his past, where street thugs cornered him and brutally beat him into the dirt. He snaps back to reality in the present, where his bald B-class roommate compliments his ironclad resolve compared to everyone else at the Ark. Li Han shakes off the compliment and suggests they head back inside, only to find themselves facing a stern-faced instructor standing outside with rows of green military gear bags lined up on the ground. The recruits eagerly rush over to grab their assigned equipment and helmets, buckling up their tactical harnesses with determined smirks. Li Han sits cross-legged on the ground clutching his heavy gear pack with a confident smile, clearly ready for whatever harsh training lies ahead. Li Han and his B-class peers sit together carrying their green gear packs, while the scar-faced recruit nearby grumbles about how pathetic everyone looks. Li Han notices the bald recruit cracking his knuckles in frustration, desperately wishing he could punch someone right now, but shakes it off since they have bigger priorities. Suddenly, Joan Rhett bellows at the top of his lungs, demanding everyone stop wasting time and get on board immediately. "We butters." The recruits jump to their feet and rush into the cargo bay of a waiting helicopter, donning their black helmets with glowing visors as the aircraft takes off into the bright blue sky. "Joni me and Hedroni any." Red pulls off his red cap and walks away, leaving the recruits soaring through the air while Li Han stares ahead with a tense and serious expression. The transport helicopter soars over the open ocean toward a remote, uninhabited island, while the B-class recruits check their gear bags inside. Joan Red looks at his glowing bracelet device and notes that the food packs in each bag will only last for 2 days. The recruits gasp in shock and sweat nervously, realizing they are expected to survive on their own on a deserted island. Joan Reed checks another exhausted recruit on a rescue boat and complains to an officer that some recruits have already grouped up instead of operating entirely solo. He stares grimly into the distance with a serious expression, promising that the instructors will eventually come back for them. Classic survival training trope. What could possibly go wrong when you drop a bunch of unprepared kids on an isolated island? Li Han and his peers now find themselves scattered across the island terrain, navigating the unexpected wilderness survival exercise. The scar-faced recruit stands victorious over a defeated opponent, while his peers cheer him on and joke about eating rations while thinking of their rivals. He holds up a ration pack for his group, boasting that they will keep plundering supplies so nobody dares look down on them again. The surrounding B-class recruits pump their fists in agreement, plotting to overpower anyone who gets in their way, including the top competitors. Meanwhile, Li Han walks alone along the sandy shoreline, sweating under the hot sun as he surveys the rugged island terrain. He pauses near the edge of the jungle, taking in the dense foliage and rocky landscape while figuring out his next move. Li Han hikes through the thick jungle vegetation while pondering if pampered prodigies like Del Simon have ever experienced genuine hunger in their lives. He suddenly halts upon crossing paths with a bald, scar-faced B-class recruit who immediately recognizes him as the legendary genius Del Simon. Li Han brushes off the mistaken identity without wanting to waste his energy, prompting the flustered recruit to chase after him with frantic apologies. After shaking off the persistent student, Li Han continues trekking deeper into the island under the golden evening sun. He soon discovers a helpless student trapped and dangling upside down in the tree branches, crying out for rescue. Naturally, Li Han seizes the golden opportunity to snatch the victim's supply bag, while casually thanking his trapped classmate for the free food. The upside-down recruit continues sobbing loudly while pleading for someone to finally take him down from the tree branches. The bald B-class recruit casually laughs it off and tells him to hang tight until the instructors arrive to help. Meanwhile, Li Han sets up a makeshift tent deep in the jungle and calmly sits inside to carve a wooden weapon. The hanging student suddenly peeks through the tent opening with wide, tearful eyes and gasps upon spotting Li Han. Li Han turns around with a bright, friendly smile and warmly greets his classmate. Li Han sits inside his tent and shares his rations with the tearful student he rescued from the tree, who gratefully wolfs down the cookies while calling himself an idiot. Outside, hovering surveillance drones monitor the entire island while John Red sits in a dark command room watching the feeds alongside Octo. Meanwhile, another recruit gleefully builds a makeshift raft and sets sail across the ocean, completely embracing the survival challenge. Back on the island, Li Han quenches his thirst with a water bottle and shares a drink with his companion before they sprint back to their shelter. The two boys run through the jungle paths with determined expressions, sweating heavily as they push forward on their survival test. Li Han suddenly catches his companion by the arm as the other boy rushes forward on the jungle path. He grabs the recruit by the shoulder while looking down at a broken stick lying on the ground. The two boys peer down into a deep pit hidden in the underbrush, staring in wide-eyed shock at the empty hole. Li Han wonders if his companion foresaw the trap just seconds before, realizing that possessing precognition is one of the strongest and rarest abilities around. He questions whether the extreme conditions of the island somehow triggered his partner's power awakening. The boys continue jogging through the forest trail until they stop to peer cautiously through the foliage at a large tent nearby. Peeking inside the canvas flap, they notice that the backpacks are missing while the B-class scar-faced recruit and his ally lurk outside. The scar-faced recruit grins maliciously with glowing purple eyes and decides to let them be for now so they can ambush them later. Meanwhile, the exhausted companion trudges heavily through the trees, wheezing for breath as he struggles to keep up the pace. Li Han and his exhausted companion trudge through the jungle path while complaining about exhaustion and wishing they could just lie down and rest. Li Han suddenly halts, grabbing a stone and crouching down as he notices fresh footprints and signs that someone was recently nearby. The duo continues hiking deeper into the woods as the sun sets, with Li Han declaring they need to find a place to sleep before it gets completely dark. His partner starts blinking heavily and complains that his eyes are closing and everything feels strange. Suddenly, glowing red psycho-energy bursts around the companion in a massive flare, leaving Li Han completely wide-eyed and shocked as a roaring phantom panther materializes from the aura. A massive beast lunges through the air, sending both boys sprawling backward onto the grass in a chaotic panic. Li Han stumbles backward on the ground as the giant panther lunges right at him, dropping his wooden weapon in a sudden panic. The beast lets out a fierce roar and snaps its jaws just inches away before vanishing into a burst of red flames. Li Han sits frozen with wide eyes as the fire dies down, revealing Jazzy standing amidst the embers with burning hands. Jazzy asks the boys how they are doing, and Li Han stares at him in disbelief before pointing out an injury wrapped in bandages on Jazzy's leg. Josie stumbles and collapses back onto the ground, groaning that he can barely even stand normally now. Li Han and his companion talk about the traps they encountered in the jungle, realizing it was all the work of the same person. Suddenly, a cheerful voice calls out to ask if they heard about the thieves running around the island, and Li Han looks up to find the scar-faced B-class recruit casually sitting nearby. Jazzy explains that he ate all his rations right after hurting his leg so nobody would steal them, leaving Li Han wondering if the guy has always been this dumb. Sitting nearby in the jungle, the scar-faced B-class recruit complains that they are running low on food and asks how everyone plans to survive the remaining 5 days. Li Han rolls his eyes and mutters that in battle, psychers should rely on psycho abilities instead of wasting physical energy. "We have an dire to die." The scar-faced recruit flexes his arm with a confident smirk and asks how he plans to survive without it, prompting an irritated glare from Li Han. Suddenly, the scar-faced recruit's eyes widen as a brilliant flash of light bursts right beside his head. Li Han suggests that they stick together until the end of the training exercise, earning an enthusiastic nod from Josie while the scar-faced B-class recruit politely agrees, pointing out that pooling their resources guarantees an advantage. Li Han thanks them and shares his shelter and rations. As Josie listens with wide eyes and a flushed face, Li Han casually boasts that saving him proves he is a psycho genius strong enough to protect everyone. Jazzy looks up at him with utter astonishment, completely convinced by the sudden display of confidence. As, reflecting on his shifting perspective, Li Han admits that keeping allies around might actually pay off after all. Focusing on their survival training on day 3, Li Han and Jose manage to catch an impressive 8 fish by combining their precognition and psychokinesis abilities. Walking back through the jungle carrying baskets full of their catch, Li Han jokingly complains about his companion's growing appetite while wiping away sweat from the summer heat. Suddenly, a loud rustling noise shatters the calm, and Li Shan's eyes go wide with alarm as he tells Jazzy to stay put. He instantly drops his basket of fish and dives away from a sudden landslide that collapses the ground beneath them. Rushing into a nearby hidden cave entrance, Li Han looks around in complete shock and tries to figure out what just happened. Waking up inside the hidden cave, Del Simon finds himself lying on the ground, surrounded by rubble, while Jazi tosses him a wooden training sword to catch. Del catches the weapon with a tense expression, wondering why Josie agreed to spar in their current situation. Josie flashes a glowing, blue-eyed glare and tells him to see if he is worthy, igniting his psycho energy. The two recruits clash as Jazi launches a fierce downward swing that gouges the dirt, forcing Del to dodge under a sweeping strike. Joyza quickly closes the distance and throws a heavy punch, but Del ducks low and counters with a swift kick. They trade rapid blows with their wooden swords in a high-speed exchange that leaves both fighters panting and sweating. Josie lunges forward again with blinding speed, raining down a flurry of strikes that pushes Del onto the defensive. Del manages to parry the onslaught before spinning around to deliver a sharp counterattack that sends Jazi stumbling backward. Del continues dodging Joji's wild staff strikes before finding an opening to sweep his legs out from under him. Jazi crashes onto the grass and quickly scrambles back up, pinning Del down with his wooden training sword while glowing blue with psycho energy. Declaring that the match is over, Jose raises his weapon for a final heavy blow and slams it down with purple energy radiating from the strike. Del stares back with wide, terrified eyes as the wooden blade strikes right beside him, leaving him pinned and breathless. Josie steps back and rubs his head, admitting with a tired sigh that while Deli would win a fair weapon fight, they are psychers, and he already mentioned how that goes. Another recruit runs over and grabs Josie by the shoulders in a panic, yelling at him not to shout so loud inside the cave. Josie, panting heavily, looks up with wide, shocked eyes while another recruit lies nearby with a pipe in his mouth, smiling and groaning that he is still alive. The cave opens up to a view of the lush greenery outside, and later Jaza sits quietly near a glowing campfire warming himself up. Li Han sits by the campfire with his companions, wiping sweat from his brow and recalling how those jerks used to bully his friends. He winks and flashes a confident smile as they support Jazi on a hike through the jungle, plotting to let their rivals think they have the upper hand. Crouching in the bushes alongside Jazia, Li Han whispers to his little panther psycho-energy companion Kuro to get ready when he is, receiving an enthusiastic nod in return. Suddenly, a rival B-class group approaches the cave entrance, smugly declaring they knew where everyone was hiding and boasting that together they can take down the scumbags. Jazi closes his eyes and channels blue psycho-energy, summoning floating rocks that blast into the rivals and catch them completely off guard. Chaos erupts as blue energy clashes with glowing attacks, leaving the recruits shouting in panic that they are trapped and cornered. Naturally, because nothing ever goes according to plan in these survival tests, the ambush turns into a chaotic scramble right outside the cave. The ambush quickly falls apart as the rival B-class recruits trip and tumble to the ground in panic, cursing the darkness. Stepping forward from the shadows with a fierce expression, Del Simon surveys the chaos and demands to know who else is hiding out here. He call asses. Li Han steps out from the bushes, telling his companion Koro to stay back because he can handle things himself. Li Hai, I-R-A-I-I-I-I-A-S. The rival leader glares back with glowing purple eyes, declaring that they came to exact revenge for Joza and warning that there won't be any mercy. Pointing a wooden staff right at the opponent, Del casually tells them that the talking is over. Rolling up his sleeves with an intimidating glare, Del snaps that he is going to crush his opponent, while Li Han fires back with a ready stance and crackling psycho-energy. Del Simon charges forward with a wooden staff, leaping at Li Han to start the fight. Li Han blocks the strike effortlessly, sending shockwaves through the air as their weapons clash. Cursing in frustration, Del swings again with a ferocious yell, but Li Han counters swiftly and lands a brutal hit right to his chest. Spitting blood and gasping for air, Del stumbles backward while Li Han watches closely with a steady gaze. Gathering his remaining strength, Del yells at Li Han to stop showing off and lunges forward for another barrage of wild attacks. Li Han dodges and returns the assault, shattering Del's staff and sending him crashing hard into the dirt. Panting heavily on the ground, Del stares in utter disbelief as he realizes he is losing, flashing back to a memory of his father in Germany telling him he was a genius actor whose popularity would help their family conquer the country. Standing back up with a furious expression, Del clenches his fists tightly and prepares to keep fighting. Shouting that some pathetic loser like him cannot stop him, Della lashes out with frantic punches and kicks. Li Han easily dodges the wild flurry and delivers a punishing blow straight to Del's midsection. Standing over his defeated opponent, Li Han grabs Della by the collar and tells him he never liked him and wonders why someone so useless hasn't been kicked out yet. Hearing the commotion, Jazi rushes toward them in a panic while shouting out Li Han's name. Enraged, Del glares at Li Han with glowing purple eyes and barks at him to not take another step. Li Kane retaliates by winding up a massive punch that sends Del crashing face first into the dirt, Looking down at the fallen opponent, Li Han demands to know if DL thinks he is actually worth anything on his own, or if he just relies on hiding behind numbers. Lying flat on the ground, Del mutters a hollow warning that if Li Han touches his friends again, nothing will remain of him. Standing tall with his wooden staff resting nearby, Li Han simply turns his back and walks away from the defeated opponent. Left sprawled out in the dirt, Del lets out a wide-eyed smile and passes out completely. Sometime later, the B-class recruits gather around the jungle camp and express their deep gratitude to Li Han, Kuro, and Joza for sharing their food. The group marvels at how Kuro managed to catch fish so effortlessly using psycho-energy, while peppering Jozi with questions about his hidden fire abilities. Jozie just rubs the back of his neck with a nervous grin while the others credit Li Han for saving everyone from starvation during the survival exam. Checking their bracelet devices in the jungle, Li Han and his peers receive a sudden broadcast announcing that survival training has concluded. It's testured. A transport helicopter arrives to pick up the recruits, leaving Li Han wondering why everyone isn't being called together at once. Seated inside the aircraft next to Kuro, Del Simon, and the B-class scar-faced recruit, Li Han listens as an instructor with glowing red eyes gravely reveals that the island exercise was actually a screening test to select humanity's ultimate defenders. The recruits sit in stunned silence as the helicopter touches down back at the facility. Time skips forward as Li Han relaxes in his room reading a book before his B-class roommate enthusiastically tosses a football at him. The group heads out to a courtyard soccer match where they play without using any psycho-energy abilities, eventually bumping fists outside while senior staff watch them closely from a glass-walled conference room. Gathered around a long conference table, the instructors and senior staff review candidate files led by Alexander Recker, the ARC headquarters chief. Sasha Grays, the chief researcher of Department No. 2, questions the candidates' backgrounds while Alexander supports the recruits advancing to the next course, based on their proven merit. Flashbacks highlight Li Shan's unconventional psychokinetic training and clever combat applications during sparring matches. Back in the courtyard, Li Han dribbles and powerfully kicks a soccer ball past the goalie into the net, celebrating with Jozi and the other recruits. Meanwhile, Sasha Grays slams her hand down on the desk in frustration, demanding to know what is going on. Sasha Grays reviews candidate files on screen, noting that someone is extremely sensitive yet emotionally weak, which sparks a heated debate among the staff about whether to advance them. Joan Raid insists that placing Li Han nearby will positively influence Kuro's psyche, while Alexander Reiko rubs his eyes in frustration over how every decision keeps circling back to Li Han. Wei Cheng questions if both men really want him to transfer so badly, pointing out the intense psychological strain and physical intervention required for the second course. Shifting back to the courtyard, Li Han and his peers sprint across the field during an intense soccer match, with Jazia dribbling past defenders and shouting that nobody is going to beat them. Li Han launches a powerful kick that sends the ball rocketing past the goalie into the net, capping off the game with a celebratory handshake and compliment from Jazzy. Jazzy cheerfully congratulates Li Han on their advancement while patting his shoulder, and as they walk together, Li Han flashes a confident grin and offers a handshake. Joan Red watches the recruits from the sidelines with arms crossed before walking up to Li Han with a fresh cigar, telling him they will meet again if he makes it to the third course. With a serious expression, Li Han stands at attention and gives a sharp military salute to his instructor. Later that evening, the recruits change into blue tracksuits and walk outside, while a bald B-class peer casually tells everyone to hit the road. As they walk together near the building at sunset, Josie suddenly freezes up and starts trembling in panic, letting out a whimper as someone grabs his shoulder from behind. Josie panics while whispering to Li Han about growing up and changing, but a bald B-class peer enthusiastically cuts in to remind them that getting stronger is the whole point. The recruits arrive at a medical facility where Sasha Grays introduces herself and explains that they will spend the next 5 weeks under her control for bodily transformation and rehabilitation. Realizing that means spending 14 days trapped inside an incubator machine, the recruits look uneasy, but Li Han grips his backpack strap tightly and raises his hand to cheerfully tell everyone he will see them in 2 weeks. He places his hand into a group huddle alongside his peers while Sasha Grays remarks to a sergeant that this must be the remarkable boy they kept praising. Moments later, the recruits find themselves submerged in glowing green liquid inside medical pods wearing oxygen masks, struggling and gasping for breath as Sasha Grays apologizes and asks them to hold on until they fall asleep. She watches over the pods a week later while reviewing data on her tablet, noting that while no major abnormalities have occurred yet, today's scheduled procedures might risk destabilizing them. Sasha Grace rubs her tired forehead while walking through the medical facility, wondering why she keeps visiting her department every day despite claiming she does not care about these kids. She collapses onto a sofa next to Joan Red, who sits smoking a cigar and remarks that his job is about whether someone lives or dies. Sasha sighs heavily and notes that the subject's conditions are stable while explaining that the medical pods contain Dragon Psychocore liquid. Joan Red puffs on his cigar, thinking that perhaps Li Han will be able to handle it, but sudden alarm klaxons blare across the room. Sasha gasps in panic as a monitor shows a massive spike in brain activity from inside one of the tanks. Realizing that Li Han has regained consciousness, Sasha panics and rushes forward to pull the emergency lever, but Joan Red immediately grabs her arm to stop her. Sasha Grace stares in horror at the monitors while demanding what they are doing and shouting that Li Han will die if they stop the incubation. Joan Red grabs her shoulders and firmly insists that the kid has to finish his transformation no matter what, because he knows Li Han will not give up easily. Flashbacks reveal a meeting inside an office where Sasha asks Li Han how he feels, noting that his case is an absolute first since he only developed physically without showing standard psycho abilities. Li Han smiles cheerfully and replies that he feels rested and is just glad he did not get kicked out for low grades, prompting Sasha to adjust her glasses and remark that Sergeant John Red was right about his emotional stability. After being told he is good to go, Li Han stands up from his chair and slides the office door open to walk out into the hallway. Time skips forward 5 weeks as Li Han stands in a hallway and cheerfully remarks to his peers that the 5 weeks flew by fast. He gestures toward the B-class recruit in Jaza, pointing out how much everyone has changed since their grueling training began. Josie rubs the back of his neck with an awkward smile while the group reunites, telling Li Han how glad he is to see everyone alive and well. Li Han glances back over his shoulder as another recruit grumbles nearby while walking through the academy corridor. He soon settles into his new private dorm room, realizing that getting used to having a separate space will take some time. The next day, the recruits gather together as a scar-faced recruit named Kato Soki introduces himself as the leader of the 7th Squad and singles out Kuro and Li Han. Kato explains the core sophomore training modules, which include firearms training, airborne prep, and simulated combat exercises. He elaborates on the tactical approach by explaining that minions have low intelligence while mid-tier commander entities called LO possess psycho abilities, meaning firearms are useless until their finite psycho energy runs out. Kato then outlines the overarching rules of the upcoming squad warfare exercise, where teams must capture the enemy's base flag using floating hover platforms and blunt weapons. As the squad listens intently, Kato praises Kuro for providing unprecedented support capabilities, leaving Kuro standing nervously with wide eyes and a bead of sweat running down his face. One of the squad members tells Li Han and Kuro that everyone is counting on them, but another recruit interrupts and claims nobody cares about their opinions since they just need to do what benefits the squad. When Kuro looks anxious and hesitant, Li Han calmly steps in to say Kuro would do much better without anyone pressuring him. That completely sets off the muscular recruit, who steps right into Li Han's face and starts shouting angry threats until another recruit steps in to calm things down and remind everyone they are all just getting started. But Li Han stands tall and tells them to show a little respect. But a brown-haired recruit with pink glowing eyes just flashes a cocky grin and dismisses Li Han as a freebie bonus who lucked into his psycho abilities. The surrounding recruits burst into laughter as the brown-haired recruit boasts that he expects nothing from a total loser and tells him to just stay out of the way. Li Han maintains an unbothered expression while offering a handshake, though the brown-haired recruit glares at him with pure arrogance before finally shaking his hand and vowing to show him what he is truly capable of. Sometime later, Li Han steps out of the shower and washes off his sweat before heading outside as the recruits arrive at the Academy's firing range training area. Li Han and his peers open fire with assault rifles at the Academy's firing range training area, sending bright muzzle flashes and ejected shell casings flying. One of the recruits struggles with his rifle while another scolds Kuro for lagging behind, causing Kuro to panic and fumble nervously. A brown-haired recruit facepalms in frustration and calls it an absolute embarrassment while walking away with his squad mates. Later, Li Han takes a hot shower to wash off the sweat before returning to his room with a towel wrapped around his waist. One of the recruits sits down nearby and smugly points out that simulated combat requires a minimum number of fighters, claiming their squad already has enough hand-to-hand combat experts without Li Han. He gives Li Han a dismissive pat on the shoulder and tells him not to get too upset since the entire sophomore class will be watching the upcoming training exercise. Li Han stares down at his device as it projects a holographic old photograph showing a bald man posing with 3 children. Li Han stares at a holographic photo of a bald man with 3 kids before a large crowd of sophomore recruits gathers inside the academy hall. Suddenly, someone calls out Del Simon's name, and a nearby B-class recruit recognizes him as the genius telekinetic while others complain about their bad luck. Another group of recruits panics when they realize they do not have any weapons for the exercise, questioning if the plan is a frontal assault. Del ignites his glowing blue telekinetic powers and unleashes a massive wave of energy that knocks out the rival squad instantly. A brown-haired recruit leads his squad forward with wooden swords, clashing in close combat until he raises a pink flag in victory. Later, a smiling recruit sits down and tells his teammate that having Kuro on their squad might just give them the winning edge. Li Han stands among the crowd of sophomore recruits while a blonde recruit complains that the ninth squad ignores terrain and tactics, relying purely on raw strength and fighter skills. The blonde recruit gives a thumbs up and points out that Li Han frequently talks back to Kato Soki during training and handles situations better than him. A dark apparition of a two-headed snake looms behind Li Han as the blonde recruit advises him to transfer to another squad during the upcoming reassignment period. Li Han reflects on these words with a serious expression and decides to follow the advice, walking away as the blonde recruit departs. Later, Li Han stands inside an office building at sunset facing Wei Chen, who sits behind a large desk, holding a document and addressing him directly. Li Han stands before Wei Chen, confirming his decision to request a squad transfer, while the instructor scratches his head and reviews the paperwork. Later, Li Han sits alone on his dormitory bed, realizing that his application won't be processed immediately and will need to be discussed at a staff meeting. Jaza suddenly enters the room through the sliding door with a friendly smile, greeting Li Han and asking how his preparations for tomorrow's aerial training are going. Li Han talks with Joza about whether the exercise involves just boards or people riding them, reassuring his peer with a confident smile that he will be rooting for him. Meanwhile, in the large training hall, sophomore recruits gather and murmur among themselves about someone exceptionally skilled in the 7th squad. Li Han listens to the surrounding chatter while watching security monitors that display aerial combat footage of recruits maneuvering on floating hover platforms. A stern-faced rival squad poses with wooden weapons outside a secure sector while the tactical training area remains packed with uniformed pillars and platforms. Other sophomore recruits in blue tactical gear exchange confident glances before assembling for the upcoming exercise. Well, finally, the various squads take their positions across the training floor as the instructors oversee the preparations from the observation deck above. The scene kicks off with a breakdown of airborne combat tactics, explaining how recruits use jetpacks, hook cables, and airboards to maneuver in midair. Recruits then clash in a simulated squad battle, where teams zip around on airboards and engage in fast-paced melee combat with glowing weapons. Watching from the sidelines, Han observes the tactical feeds and listens to the surrounding chatter as teams execute coordinated pincer movements. Suddenly, a rival recruit drops down from above and tries to ambush, but gets swiftly swatted away by an opponent wielding an airboard. With the simulation heating up, the squads gather in a briefing room to plan their strategy and assign board control duties to Kuro before the next round begins. Recruits finalize their tactical approach in the briefing room, with Josie nodding in agreement while Li Han quietly observes the strategy from the shadows. Stepping onto the floating hover platforms, both teams power up their psycho-energy and prepare for a direct clash. The rival squad rushes forward in a head-on charge, shouting battle cries as they launch their attack. Josie and his allies surge ahead on their airboards to meet them, executing swift maneuvers to bypass the enemy's formation. Chaos erupts as blades clash and bodies collide in midair, with the remaining opponents expressing shock at their sudden onslaught. Kuro rockets forward across the aerial platform, dodging attacks while teammates yell warnings about his aggressive moves. He relentlessly targets the rival squad, pushing them back as the match intensifies into a brutal one-on-one skirmish. Spectators watch from the observation room, murmuring in disbelief as Kuro manages to control 2 airboards simultaneously despite running low on stamina. Meanwhile, Li Han observes the chaotic arena from the crowd with a sharp gaze, while Kuro stands victorious over a downed opponent. Del Simon stands sweating and panicked inside the arena as a nearby explosion goes off, staring in disbelief after making a critical mistake. Spectators in the stands celebrate as the first squad claims victory, while Li Han watches the monitor with a focused and serious expression. Following the match, Li Han steps into an office to meet with instructor Wei Chen, who formally approves his squad transfer request. Wei Chen hands over the documents while explaining that this new leadership position will serve as a true test of Li Han's reputation and charisma. Li Han accepts the challenge with a confident grin, stepping out of the office to figure out his next move. Classic shonen protagonist move, getting handed a leadership role just like that. He leaves the meeting room feeling determined and mutters to himself that he needs to talk to Kuro first. Li Han approaches the B-class recruit, and strikes up a conversation while the friendly soldier wipes his sweat with a towel. The recruit is surprised by the sudden visit, but they chat casually while sipping drinks nearby. Meanwhile, Del Simon groans in frustration and rubs his head while talking to John Red, complaining that they should have picked someone else. John Red notes that Del completely dominated his opponents with telekinesis and martial arts, whereas Kuro turned out to be completely useless in these conditions. Listening in from the side, Lee Han realizes he might need to find a replacement if Kuro's abilities remain dead weight for squad warfare. He turns his attention back to the B-class recruit and proposes a squad transfer on the spot, but the recruit scratches his neck and points out that he cannot just abandon his own 5th squad. Lee Han stays calm and proposes an informal arrangement instead, making it clear he wants to bypass strict hierarchy rules and keep things friendly. Lee Han grins and tells his rival not to cry when they meet on the battlefield, warning that he will break both of his arms this time. Nearby recruits whisper insults about someone wanting power, causing Lee Han to pause and retort that they should speak up instead of whispering. Kato Soki steps forward with glowing purple eyes and demands that Lee Han leave Kuro alone, claiming he cannot unlock his talent under his command. Lee Han points out the absurdity of asking an opponent to wait during a war, arguing that a squad leader must win even with limited forces. Kato loses his temper and grabs Lee Han by the collar, screaming that he will not hand over Kuro and threatening to kill him if he leaves. Lee Han stays completely unfazed, reminding Kato that Kuro should make his own choice and sarcastically noting that he would keep talking even if he were drowning. Enraged, Kato swings a heavy punch and knocks Lee Han to the ground with a loud crash. Lee Han quickly recovers his footing and brushes off the blow, ready to settle the score without missing a beat. Lee Han checks his bracelet device as Sasha Grays gathers the recruits outside to assign 6 new rookies to different squads. He realizes this is his golden opportunity to snatch up at least one recruit for his newly formed squad, but approaches them with a warm and welcoming smile. Nearby peers immediately start mocking him for having an empty squad and trying to recruit people into a team of one, causing Josier to step in and try to calm things down with a wave. Lee Han beams brightly at Josie, glad to see a familiar face willing to engage, though the recruiting process clearly has a long way to go. Lee Han chats with Jazi, thanking him for trusting him and joining the squad, while Jazi cheerfully declares that anyone refusing to join is an idiot. After they finish talking and prepare for hard work starting tomorrow, Kuro suddenly appears nearby with a bruised face and bandages. Kuro nervously chuckles when asked what happened, revealing that an angry recruit grabbed him by the collar and yelled at him for abandoning them. Lee Han welcomes Kuro to the team with a grin, noting that the uninhabited island crew is back together and ready to handle anything. Another recruit with short blonde hair and teal-green eyes playfully pops up with finger guns, asking if he can join too since everyone knows what follows next. With the squad finally coming together, Lee Han flashes a confident, determined smirk, ready to take on whatever challenges lie ahead with his new teammates. But Instructor Grossman greets the newly formed 13th squad and points out Kuro's bruised face, prompting Kuro to casually brush it off by claiming he just fell down the stairs. Grossman smirks and warns them to be careful before briefing the team that they have 3 weeks for preparatory training because their squad formed later than the others. Lee Khan immediately talks back and insists that Grossman is underestimating them, which causes an opposing squad to angrily sneer from a distance. Frustrated by the lack of discipline, Lee Han grabs his blonde teammate by the helmet and barks at him to take things seriously instead of asking to sit on the bench. He quickly pitches a rushed strategy called the Mobile Bunker Plan and tells his teammates not to laugh at the terrible name he just came up with on the spot. The opposing squad looks on with sheer annoyance and urges everyone to finish up the match quickly. Both squads gear up with their tactical equipment and gaze forward with grim determination as the simulated combat exercise officially begins. Spectators cheer wildly in the arena, while screaming for the 9th squad to crush the traitors. Out in the forest, Del Simon checks his bracelet device and gasps in panic as he realizes the enemy squad is closing in fast. Zhu Ace and another recruit complain about the lack of breathing room while moving through the dense trees under pressure. Del mutters in frustration about wishing he knew how to handle the situation better before getting zapped by a sudden electrical shock on his leg. He yells out in pain while stumbling through the brush and frantically urges his teammates to pull back. Ignoring the agony, Del suddenly spins around and opens fire with his rifle in a desperate attempt to shoot back at the pursuers. The rival squad mocks his futile efforts and easily dodges the incoming shots while closing the distance. Del crashes onto the ground in defeat, realizing just how outmatched they truly are in this brutal simulation exercise. Del Simon screams out in pain as he takes a hit and struggles on the ground before desperately firing back at his pursuers. He quickly realizes his rifle needs reloading right as an enemy squad leader towers over him, and notes how they are just improvising on the fly. Back in the viewing area, Kuro and the blonde rookie watch from the stands while discussing the 13th squad's heavy reliance on a single wooden log shield. Meanwhile, the 9th squad encounters the rolling log barrier in the forest and panics as they realize they lack the raw telekinetic power to push through it. The ninth squad leader curses under his breath while trying to figure out how to counter the oncoming assault. The ninth squad leader panics in the forest as smoke and sudden flames sweep through their position, coughing heavily and struggling to breathe. Meanwhile, the 13th squad quietly coordinates their ambush while hiding in the dense fog, noting that their opponents are completely blinded. Li Han and his team unleash a sudden volley of precise psychic attacks, quickly taking down the disoriented 9th squad members one by one. The simulation abruptly ends with an announcement declaring the 13th squad the winners as the stadium erupts into loud cheers. Spectators in the stands watch in utter shock and amazement, while murmuring about Kuro and Li Han dominating the match. The victorious 13th squad members flash confident thumbs-up gestures as they celebrate their hard-fought win on screen. The 13th squad gathers inside their dorm for a celebratory feast with plenty of food and drinks, raising their glasses to toast their huge victory. Jose excitedly praises Li Han for his aggressive yet brilliant tactical read of the rival squad, while the blonde recruit flashes a thumbs-up and enthusiastically agrees. Suddenly, the blonde recruit coughs and doubles over in pain from his simulated injury, laughing it off and insisting he wouldn't miss a feast like this for the world. Later that night, a mysterious figure sits alone in a dark room illuminated only by a glowing monitor, deep in thought. He taps his chin while reviewing candidate profiles on a holographic display, pausing specifically on a recruit from the 7th squad with a knowing look. Li Han lies awake in his dorm bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how he used to lose sleep over the fear of getting kicked out of ARC now that he has reliable teammates by his side. Out in the forest during a combat simulation, a rival squad gathers together to review the plan and discuss taking down their opponents. The rival squad members note that their targets possess powerful telekinesis, but a solid beating will make them forget all about it. Meanwhile, Kuro and the blonde rookie stand alongside Jose while staring in shock as they realize the rival team's leader has placed a headband on Kuro's head. As the rival squad advances through the woods with their captain in the lead, Kuro and his teammates watch from a distance and figure out their next move. Li Han perches high up in a tree trunk, calmly looking down at the forest floor where his 13th squad members brace for a sudden ambush by the rival team. Jazier tries to unleash a flame attack, but one of the rival recruits quickly dodges and points out that his trick will not work against them. The clash intensifies as both sides lock weapons in a brutal struggle, while Kuro drops down from above and shouts that Kuro belongs to them now. The rival squad members laugh and boast that they are about to win as they crowd around their targets, but Kuro suddenly activates his glowing blue eyes and powers up with an intense burst of energy. Josie glances around with wide eyes as the surrounding forest erupts into a massive cloud of dust, muttering that it was a trap while trying to catch his breath. Suddenly, a rival recruit collapses to the ground under a heavy impact, leaving the blonde rookie and curly-haired recruit staring in shock as their teammates secure the win. The screen flashes to announce that the battle is over and the 13th squad has emerged victorious, sending the surrounding crowd into a massive cheering frenzy. Spectators chatter among themselves about the sheer scale of the victory and marvel at Li Han's insane fighting ability, while a bald recruit crosses his arms and laughs about how quickly opinions change. High up on a viewing platform, Li Han holds up a captured red ribbon and casually notes that victory is theirs, though down below, someone clenches a glowing fist in furious frustration. The scene shifts back to a training hall where Kuro glows with blue energy and launches himself across the room, landing smoothly before praising himself as amazing. Kuro turns to Li Han with a wide grin and asks if he is scared, pointing out that everyone else would already be flying away. The 13th squad gathers to enjoy a feast of delicious dishes and drinks in celebration of their hard-fought victory. Bagdiri said. Jose suddenly panics and apologizes profusely for breaking Li Han's arm, but Li Han just smiles and tells him not to sweat it. Their wrist devices suddenly start flashing and buzzing with a loud alert, signaling that a brand new match has just been assigned. Jazia loses his temper and yells in disbelief, pointing out that facing the 7th squad with an injured teammate is basically an automatic loss. Just then, Jonreid walks into the room and taunts Katosoki, telling him that his squad would have won even without Li Han's injury, and demanding that he secure a victory. Katosoki clenches his fists in frustration as he absorbs the provocation, standing up to head out and deal with the unfair matchup. Li Han exhales deeply and starts walking away from the confrontation while his peers stand around looking tense. He stops and tells them to stop whining because it changes nothing, promising that he will figure out a way for them to win. Jonreid catches up and sarcastically asks if that is just empty talk, taunting Li Han about whether he can actually pull this off with a broken arm. Li Han waves his hand dismissively and brags that one arm is more than enough to beat their rival squad, which only makes Jonreid snap and step in close with an intense glare. Jonreid points his finger and angrily threatens to kill both Li Han and Kuro, But Li Han keeps his cool with glowing blue eyes and fires back that nobody here has actually killed anyone yet. Joan Red backs off in frustration, while the other recruits watch nervously, and Li Han turns around to tell his squad to head inside the gym. He uses his psycho energy to manipulate an airboard on the floor, but quickly starts sweating as he struggles to maintain control with his injured arm. Li Han glances sideways at his teammates, panting heavily as he admits that managing even a single board is turning out to be way harder than expected. Jaza struggles in the training area as he tries to simultaneously control 2 airboards in flames, complaining that there is nothing in the empty air to burn. He notes that trying to land precise attacks while moving at high speed makes targeting incredibly difficult, especially with limited physical support against a well-balanced 7th squad. Nearby recruits watch from the stands and scoff at the 13th squad's sloppy performance, mocking them for talking so much trash while showing such poor preparation. One blonde recruit with wavy hair listens to the murmurs in annoyance and snaps at the onlookers to back off, asking why everyone is staring so closely. The onlookers mutter among themselves about Li Han's broken arm and wonder how on earth their ragtag squad expects to survive this upcoming combat simulation. Li Han and his 13th squad stand ready on the platform as their combat simulation against the 7th squad officially begins. The opposing team watches in absolute disbelief as 16 airboards suddenly activate and hover in the air around the 13th squad, far exceeding the normal limit of 2 boards per sophomore. Joan Red panics at the sight and urges Kato Soki to speak up, but Kato grimly tells his squad to stick to the plan and destroy the newcomers one by one. Unfazed by the mounting tension, Li Han flashes a confident grin with glowing blue eyes and channels his psycho energy into the airboard. He steps forward with his squad and leaps into the air, launching straight into the chaotic aerial battle against the 7th squad. The 13th squad launches straight into action as Li Han and his peers dash forward on multiple airboards to engage the 7th squad in midair. Recruits watch from the sidelines in utter astonishment, questioning how much those extra airboards cost while cheering wildly for the chaos to unfold. Amid the flying blasts and fiery explosions, John Red panics and yells at his team to block the attacks before their own airboards get destroyed. The sudden onslaught forces everyone into a desperate scramble as powerful shockwaves rock the entire training area. Suddenly, an instructor rushes into the fray with a furious expression, screaming at the top of his lungs for the reckless combat simulation to stop immediately. The heated clash escalates as John Red and the instructor end up shouting right into each other's faces amid the lingering smoke and debris. Once the shouting finally dies down, the instructor sits back down at his desk with a heavy, serious look while resting his chin on his intertwined hands. Li Han stands in the instructor's office with a cast on his arm, wondering why he was called just to be stared at in total silence. Joan Reed scratches his head awkwardly, bringing up the exorbitant cost of airboards and questioning if Li Han even realizes how expensive they are. Li Han calmly replies that he knows they cost a lot, while Joan Rett rests his chin on his hands and points out that, while no rules were officially broken, deploying so many airboards was bound to spark massive controversy. Li Han defends his unorthodox tactic by arguing that they wouldn't hesitate to use extreme measures if they were fighting actual dragons. Suddenly breaking into laughter, Joan Red admits he was just testing him and chuckles that Li Han reminds him of someone he used to know. Li Han snaps into a sharp military salute before turning around and heading back out to face his squad. Meanwhile, the action shifts instantly back to the mid-air combat zone as recruits sweep through fiery explosions while slicing through the smoky airspace. Li Han smoothly dodges a massive incoming fiery attack and delivers a powerful counterstrike against his opponent in mid-air. He lands gracefully while a rival recruit points a finger and angrily tells him that nobody will praise him for winning with such a pathetic strategy. Li Han fires back with a deadpan remark, asking if the guy really stood outside the door the whole time just to say that. Walking back with his arm in a cast, Li Han joins his squad for a celebratory feast spread out across their room. Jose nervously mentions that he was terrified they would get disqualified for rule violations, but the blonde recruit brushes it off while glancing at his watch. Suddenly, their wrist devices beep in unison to reveal a notification scheduling their next capture, the flag match against the 5th squad in just 7 days. Li Han smiles faintly while noting that scheduling them back-to-back against the strongest opponents in this format is totally a Grossman move. Meanwhile, a muscular recruit finishes a heavy weightlifting session in the gym, wiping away sweat and grumbling about the brutal pacing before heading outside for a refreshing run. The muscular recruit complains about wanting a shower already while walking down the path, only to be approached from behind by a long-haired recruit who grabs his shoulder and demands to know if he'll keep ignoring him now that he's advanced to the 3rd year. The recruit cheerfully claims his squad is doing great since he's the leader now, but freezes up when the long-haired guy instantly flares with purple psycho energy and snarls at him to back off before he kills him. Meanwhile, Li Han stands on a wooded training ground gripping a staff, staring wide-eyed and sweating as a masked, hooded figure with glowing red eyes steps forward, holding twin blades. The mysterious swordsman dashes toward Li Han with incredible speed, clashing violently against his staff in a blinding flash of blue energy. Li Han braces himself as the attacker lands a heavy counterstrike, sending shockwaves through the dirt and leaving him struggling to hold his ground. Li Han lies pinned to the ground, gasping in agony as a bleeding recruit collapses over him, prompting a rugged instructor to point sternly and insist the scheduled match will proceed regardless. Holding a stack of documents, the instructor remarks that the 5th squad will be a headless chicken without their key fighter, though he smugly notes victory is practically guaranteed. Li Han looks over the transfer paperwork and notes that it is exactly as he expected, spotting confidential files for several recruits who want to compete on even terms. Dismissing the instructor's advice to take time to think, Li Han declares that he will take everyone because they are in no position to be picky. The newly assembled team of 4 recruits stands before him in the forest, and Li Han greets them to the 13th squad with a confident grin. One of the recruits relaxes with his hands behind his head, while Li Han gestures to ask if anyone has objections, earning a nervous smile and a cheeky comment asking him to take care of a fellow Korean recruit. Li Han rallies his newly formed 13th squad in the forest, explaining that nationality does not matter in ARC, and reminding them to prove their worth while addressing a nervous recruit. Walking away in frustration, one recruit mutters curses under his breath, while another jokingly explains the foreign profanity to his confused blonde teammate. Flashbacking to 10 minutes earlier, Li Han instructs the squad to charge forward and flank the enemy with Kuro and Kasim, reminding his teammates that the 5th squad is currently their easiest opponent without their key fighter. Li Han urges everyone to stay vigilant and secure the victory. The 13th squad swiftly ambushes the opposing fighters, knocking them down with coordinated strikes until all 5 rivals lie defeated on the ground. Spotting a mysterious hooded figure sitting near the red flag in the distance, the recruits point it out just as the shadowy swordsman suddenly vanishes and launches a brutal surprise attack from behind. Caught off guard by the sudden assault, Li Han thinks that there is no time to even be surprised as he narrowly avoids a swinging blade. Panicking recruits nearby curse under their breath and yell that they cannot even get close to the terrifying attacker. The mysterious hooded swordsman leaps through the air with glowing red eyes, effortlessly slamming onto Li Han and pinning him to the ground. Grimacing in frustration, Li Han refuses to give up as the skull-masked figure stands victorious over his fallen squad mates. Meanwhile, other recruits back at ARC watch the commotion unfold in total disbelief and begin whispering frantically among themselves. Someone drops the chilling name Silence, leaving everyone around them completely stunned and wondering if the rumors are actually true. Staring down the terrifying attacker, Li Han realizes that blocking the incoming strike is his only chance of survival. He calculates that the skull-masked swordsman covers roughly 15 meters per second, and refuses to give up despite the overwhelming odds, reminding himself that the actual goal of the exercise is capturing the flag rather than beating every opponent. He grips his weapon tightly and prepares for another move. Meanwhile, a blonde recruit watches the terrifying display unfold in absolute panic, realizing that this masked fighter is far stronger than any second-year student. Dodging a furious purple aura slash, Li Han drops low to the ground and braces himself as the chaotic forest simulation continues around them. Dropping into a sudden flurry of sword strikes, Silence leaps toward Li Han and unleashes a barrage of rapid attacks. Li Han manages to parry the heavy blows, but the sheer force of the impact leaves him staggering and completely overwhelmed by the opponent's speed. Realizing he cannot overpower the swordsman head-on, Li Han suddenly shifts his focus away from the fight and sprints past him toward the objective. He grabs the flagpole and proudly declares victory, leaving Silence stunned and bewildered by the sudden turnaround. Watching from afar, John Rhett clenches his fist in fury while a recruit grits his teeth in utter frustration over the outcome. Later, someone feeds a small stray cat with a piece of sausage while reflecting on their past. Kuro sits outdoors feeding a stray cat while recalling how he never had friends or talents that made him stand out before joining the squad. Another recruit with a bandaged forehead suddenly interrupts him and casually asks to discuss taking the vacant deputy squad leader position over the weekend. Annoyed by the interruption, Kuro grabs the cat and tosses it aside, telling the recruit to leave him alone. The recruit backs away in absolute shock, as Kuro's eyes glow bright blue and his psycho energy surges violently into the air. Terrified by the sudden display of overwhelming power, the recruit stammers an apology, while Kuro aggressively orders him never to do that again. Kuro then turns and sprints away down the path, leaving the other recruit completely exhausted and collapsing onto the ground in sheer relief. Meanwhile, a stray cat leaps away while a recruit sits on a hospital bed and asks what Li Han wants. Li Han listens intently as the hospitalized recruit confesses his suspicions about ARC before recalling how terrifying their third-year opponents were. The injured recruit clutches his bedsheets in frustration, while muttering that they were completely crushed without even having a chance to move. Li Han sits quietly and thinks about how rare third-year equipment is in ARC, realizing that a real battle awaits them before graduation. Suddenly, a heavily armored figure in dark, tactical gear approaches the stray cat outside. Shazier rushes over in a panic to pick up the cat and pet it, only to find himself face-to-face with the mysterious armored newcomer. José stares in wide-eyed shock at the towering figure and mutters that the voice sounds strangely familiar. Josie stares in disbelief as the heavily armored figure removes his helmet, revealing himself to be none other than Joan Red. John Red casually hands Josie a canned drink from the vending machine and assures him that seeing second-generation telekinetic armor early isn't a bad thing. He explains that second-generation equipment responds brilliantly to telekinesis, though he notes that they might want to reduce the dragon flesh material used for the internal systems to make it easier to control. Ah! Just then, a white-coated scientist with wild hair and a thick mustache approaches them, introducing himself as Charles Smith, the head of the first group and legendary creator of the original telekinetic armor. Charles explains that while first-generation gear was rushed, the second generation is built specifically for these recruits to be the ultimate weapon. José sweats nervously while gripping his new gear, realizing he has to suit up in the exact same equipment he just watched his senior test out. Li Han sits at his desk using his telekinesis to write in his notebook, evaluating his abilities and strategizing for upcoming squad battles. He notes that while he lacks the absolute telekinesis instructors like Wei Chen talk about, he has developed a unique ability that sets him apart from other second-year recruits. Glancing at his bracelet device as it chimes, he realizes it is time to go and immediately heads out to join the other recruits on the running track. Running alongside the others, he chats casually with a bald recruit named Dmitri about yesterday's spatial fissure. But, suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning strikes the sky, abruptly shifting everyone's attention to a new disturbance. An instructor explains the historical background of telekinetic abilities, noting they first appeared over a decade ago during a major regional crisis. After the morning workout wraps up, Li Han and the other recruits head off to get cleaned up and prepare for their upcoming mission. While resting, Dmitri casually asks if they are heading out on a school field trip, drawing a few laughs from the surrounding squad members. Later, the recruits gather at the landing pad, where a fleet of military helicopters awaits to transport them out. Inside the aircraft, an instructor details how the Republic of Korea handled past refugee crises and border conflicts following the northern region's collapse. As the transport choppers soar through the sky toward a glowing spatial fissure, the rear hatch opens to let the 13th Squad prepare for deployment. Inside the transport helicopter, the recruits complain about being exhausted and just wanting to go home and sleep, while the aircraft soar closely together through the stormy sky. Li Han looks out the window, quietly noting that if this is the 4th platoon of their course, the 10th Squad must be nearby. He glances over at Dmitri, who cheerfully gives a thumbs up from a window port, prompting Li Han to fix his hair and smile back. Suddenly, a violent purple lightning strike hits the helicopter, plunging everything into chaos as alarms blare and explosions light up the sky. Li Han's eyes go wide with pure shock as an instructor abruptly grabs him by the collar and shouts that it is an emergency, and everyone needs to evacuate the chopper immediately. Following the lightning strike, an instructor urgently orders Del Simon to gather his squad immediately upon landing and take command if the chief instructor fails to appear. Del Simon acknowledges the order with wide-eyed tension just as another massive purple blast engulfs the helicopter in midair. He bails out into the stormy skies and parachutes down into the dense forest canopy, crashing hard into the foliage. Catching his breath, he quickly shifts his expression into a sharp, determined glare as he sets his sights on regrouping. He pulls out a combat knife from his gear and cautiously navigates through the thick bushes to search for wreckage or signals from his teammates. While navigating the forest, Del Simon unexpectedly bumps into B-class recruit, who asks what he is doing here and notes he was watching the helicopter land. They decide to stick together and start breaking tree branches to leave trail markers so they don't get lost in the dense woods. Suddenly, they stumble upon a burning crash site where a terrifying werewolf-like beast lunges out from the wreckage. Del Simon tells B-class recruit to search the helicopter for anything useful while he stays back to distract the creature. The towering monster immediately whips its tail toward him, wrapping around his arm and binding him tightly as danger closes in. Del Simon yells for the B-class recruit to hurry, shouting that he is running as he scrambles across the forest floor while the werewolf-like beast lunges with a massive tail whip. Panicking and screaming that he wants to escape, the B-class recruit panics further near the burning wreckage, cursing that Sector 2 is completely out of usable ammo. Meanwhile, Del Simon slices frantically at the thick tendrils binding his arms, shouting in panic that the monster is regenerating and that he is completely doomed. Just as the towering beast rears back to strike him, A glowing blue telekinetic shield suddenly slams down from above to block the attack. Del Simon grips a combat knife and warns the injured B-class recruit to stay back as the werewolf-like beast lunges with massive claws. The creature smashes into the ground and whips its tail around, sending the recruit crashing hard against the forest floor. Panicking in pure terror, the B-class recruit curses his luck and asks if the monster is finally dead while bleeding heavily from his wounds. A comforting hand reaches down to pat his head, telling him he did a good job despite feeling like he is falling apart. The two battered recruits finally lean on each other for support and slowly limp away from the fiery crash site into the safety of the dark forest. Del Simon and the B-class recruit suddenly stumble upon a campfire surrounded by other surviving recruits, who immediately give a thumbs up and praise their leader's brilliant decisions. The relief is short-lived, though, as Li Han steps out from the brush and drops the grim news that they were ambushed by the Ninth Squad and barely escaped with their lives. Remembering the werewolf-like beast controlled by 3 monsters from the Elo tribe, the recruits panic about having no weapons or gear left to defend themselves. Li Han steps forward with a determined look on his face, assuring everyone that he has a solid plan to build a fortified shelter and wait for backup. He immediately directs the squad to construct a massive wooden log barrier around their camp to keep out any predators that hunt in the dark. While keeping watch by the fence, the B-class recruit nervously whispers to Li Han about what would happen if a rescue helicopter crashed just like the last one, questioning if Ark even has any idea what is going on. Classic survival trope right there, because what could possibly go wrong when stranded in the dark with hostile monsters roaming around? Del Simon stands among the recruits wondering if real battles are truly this exhausting, while realizing the Tark simulations completely pale in comparison to reality. Li Han and the squad quickly organize their defenses as glowing blue, psycho-energy surges around them to form a massive protective barrier. The recruits charge forward into the fray with spears raised while executing coordinated aerial maneuvers to strike the monstrous threat head-on. Del Simon and Li Han thrust their weapons into the beast's chest with explosive force, though the creature retaliates by sending Del Simon crashing back against the wooden log barrier with a heavy impact. Gritting his teeth in pain, Del Simon insists that he is totally fine while the rest of the squad continues launching relentless spear attacks from above. Li Han immediately pivots and shouts to the squad to track down the next target without missing a beat. Li Han spots multiple werewolf-like beasts approaching from the 12 o'clock position and immediately orders the squad to ignite the wooden barricades. Jazzy sets the fence ablaze, while the terrifying creatures pause briefly before charging straight through the roaring flames. Li Han leaps into the air with a spear and drives it downward into the monster's skull with brutal force. Go rushes forward and joins the assault, shouting curses as he drives his weapon deep into the enemy's head. Meanwhile, a white-haired recruit surges with glowing blue psycho energy and yells out warnings to his teammates. He suddenly shoves Go violently out of the way just as a deadly claw slashes through the air. The beast crashes to the ground with a heavy thud, leaving Go staring in shock while realizing the strike only managed to tear his clothing. Li Han quickly assesses the grim situation as his exhausted squad struggles to catch their breath and realizes their energy is nearly depleted. He looks around nervously while wondering where the pack's leader could possibly be hiding. Suddenly, his eyes widen in pure terror as a towering white werewolf-like beast steps forward out of the shadows. He gasps in shock and identifies the creature as a sentient werewolf with an active consciousness. Li Han panics and wonders what to do as dark psycho-energy wraps around him while the white werewolf-like beast lunges. He suddenly tightens his grip on his spear and shouts to the squad that they can survive if they hold out a bit longer. Kasim and the other recruits brace themselves while enduring heavy pressure and strain. Suddenly, the towering white beast unleashes a massive energy blast right toward the barricade. The explosion sends shockwaves crashing through the area and knocks the recruits back. Amid the chaos, John Red steps out in his heavy tactical armor to handle the threat. He activates the suit and raises his hand, shifting the tide of the battle as the recruits catch their breath. Del Simon sits alongside a B-class recruit and recalls how half their squad died in the deadly forest clash, while werewolf-like beasts attacked from all sides. He admits that despite the overwhelming terror, they survived and celebrated their hard-won victory in the grueling trial. Bichia Jews on Li Han sits alone in a quiet room, clenching his fist as he reflects on the sheer gulf in power between humans and the towering monsters they face. Suddenly, a familiar fist punches straight through the wall, startling Li Han with a sudden alert message on his bracelet device demanding his immediate presence. Stepping out into the hallway, Li Han hears footsteps approaching and mutters to himself about the reckless destruction of the wall before spotting the skull. Masked swordsman Silence walking right up behind him. Li Han walks down the hallway alongside Silence, who dismisses a message on his bracelet device with a middle finger and a text reply telling Sergeant Red to leave him alone. Entering a large briefing room, Li-Han sits down on a couch opposite Joan Red and Del Simon while wondering if Silence holds a grudge against him over the flag capture victory. Wei Chen sits at the head of a massive conference table surrounded by instructors and squad leaders, sternly declaring that they need to interrogate the commander to learn the truth about what happened since this was only training and not a real war. He stresses that the Supreme Council has made its final decision, placing a heavy burden of responsibility on Chief Instructor Grossman's shoulders. As the meeting gets underway to discuss the recent incident involving Elo mages and werewolf-like beasts, typical bureaucratic meetings manage to make monster attacks even more tedious. Recruits murmur amongst themselves about how Elo mages possess the ability to open dimensional gates, prompting intense expressions from the leadership gathered around the table. John Red sits down heavily and crosses his arms while bluntly suggesting that, instead of consulting the Oracle, they should capture Elo mages and torture them to get all the answers they need. B-Class Recruit and Silence listen closely with wide eyes, while Wei Chen rubs his brow in exasperation at the aggressive proposal. Shifting scenes to the research lab, Chief Scientist Octo enthusiastically welcomes Li-Han and B-Class Recruit for gear selection. Li-Han examines a dragon weapon spear, watching in surprise as it glows with blue energy, while Octa explains that the dragon flesh material mimics a fighter's telekinetic energy. B-Class Recruit immediately asks if there are other weapons available, prompting an annoyed pout from Octa before he proudly presents a spherical device. B-Class Recruit and Li-Han catch the hovering metallic spheres as Octa tells them to pick their basic gear. Octa proudly demonstrates a compact, lightweight version of the gear featuring manual control, prompting Li-Han and B-Class Recruit to gear up and head out for an operation codenamed Catch the Mage. The team arrives at a glowing spatial fissure and exits their helicopter to survey the ruined surroundings on foot. Joan Red pauses with a cigar to tell Li-Han that evaluating combat skills alone isn't enough, noting how impressed he is that Li-Han's squad survived without gear and even fought back against monsters. He points out that most recruits suffer severe psychological damage and break down after facing such intense combat environments, leaving Li-Han looking startled and sweaty palms. B-Class Recruit and Del Simon stand nearby with steady expressions as the recruits gather together, pumping their fists in motivation while chanting enthusiastically. Silence steps forward with a masked glare, declaring that they will prove who the best fighter really is. The tactical team breaks into two squads, with Silence and Li-Han teaming up, while John Red pairs with Del Simon. It says as moving cautiously through the ruined landscape. Silence pauses to check his watch before adjusting his pixelated helmet, which conveniently flashes text stating that he is not hot. Li-Han watches this bizarre display with a sweaty, startled expression, clearly wondering what kind of weirdo he is working with. The squad pushes deeper into the dense forest terrain, spreading out to maintain a sharp perimeter. They soon spot hooded Elo mages moving stealthily through the trees ahead. Silence taps his wrist device to signal the rest of the team into position, then ignites his glowing blue swords and rushes forward to deal with the targets. The tactical squad tracks the Elo scouts through the brush, noting that the targets were likely out gathering intelligence. Joan Red praises Li-Han for the deduction and orders everyone to keep their distance while tracking the mages. Peering through night vision equipment, Li-Han and Del Simon observe an ominous ritual where a glowing blue crystal floats amid a cloud of purple energy, while a robed Elo mage channels power. John Red quickly rallies the team to regroup with Silence and initiate the plan to catch the mage before things escalate further. The team creeps closer to the clearing where the ritual is taking place, peering down at the ominous setup from the brush. Del Simon peeks through his night vision gear and wonders aloud what is happening right next to the altar. He stares in disbelief as he recognizes the rows of unconscious captives lying helplessly on the ground. A bead of sweat rolls down his face as he realizes who the victims actually are. He clenches his teeth in shock upon noticing that the captured bodies belong to their fellow recruits. Because seriously, what could possibly go wrong when your classmates end up as ritual sacrifices?